Well, I'm excited about who's going to speak today. I don't know if it's 6 months ago, 8 months ago, I'm not exactly sure, but this person came to our church, and after the sermon, she came over and we met, and she has become one of my best friends. She has a passion for things spiritual. She is brilliant, and she has just become a dear friend to Jane and me. And so I asked her, Tricia, would you share with us? And she said she would. I want you to get to know her like I know her. She's been here now 6 months, 8 months. Her name is Tricia Cunningham. You're going to be blessed. Would you give it up and welcome Tricia to the stage?
Seems like this year, beginning of this year, is doing things that I haven't done in a while. So I'm a bit nervous. All those songs about fear this morning were spot on. Spot on. I just want to thank Ray and Jane for this opportunity. One of the lines in one of the songs that Matt sang this morning said, there's a place for me in the Father's house. And before I came here to this church, I had been told there wasn't a place for me. And so I don't take standing up here lightly. I don't take the ability occasionally when I do music here lightly. It's very special, and it's an honor. And so anyway, I just wanted to say that, thank you. This morning's topic is probably not one that's talked a lot about in church. My favorite movie of all time is Dead Poets Society with Robin Williams. I love that movie. I've probably seen it 12 times at least. And the phrase in that movie that you see all the time is carpe diem, which is seize the day. And, that's like the theme of the movie. And it's, kind of a theme in our lives. We should take every day because we never know that tomorrow's not promised, And so, but the message today is carpe noctem, which is seize the night. There's a poem, I love poetry, and there's a poem by Mary Oliver called The Uses of Sorrow. It's just 2 lines, 2 sentences. It says, someone I loved once gave me a box full of darkness. It took me years to understand that this too was a gift. 2 sentences and so much life experience crammed into them. Like many of you here, I have found my share of boxes of darkness on my doorstep. Divorce, cancer, the sudden death of my 19-year-old niece, betrayal of friends. These are just a few of the boxes that have landed on my doorstep over the years. And like death and taxes, darkness is inevitable. And darkness, like death and taxes, can be a really scary thing. In fact, the dangers of darkness, the way we've been taught about it, is that it's like the law of gravity. It just is. Darkness always equates with danger. This morning, I'm here to tell you that's not true. So while everything looks different in the dark, I have reached that age where driving at night is not fun, especially if it's raining. And because everything looks different in the dark. I can take a well-traveled path I know during the day. I'm doing just fine. Put me on that same path at night in the rain, and I have no idea where I am. So just a side note, you might want to think twice about getting in the car with me if I'm in the driver's seat and it's dark outside. Just saying. So anyway, I think in life, everything looks different in the dark. When you have that box land on your doorstep, your whole world looks different. Your whole world looks different. I think that when I was preparing for this, I was like, well, where did this fear of the darkness come from? And anthropologists suggest that it came from the process of evolution, where human beings learned that they were more at risk at night of being attacked by predators or being attacked by their enemies. In the dark, too, our visual senses vanish. And we're unable to detect what or who is around us. I think that in and of itself can be scary. Worse yet, and this is my thing, our imaginations tend to run wild. And when we can't see things that are going on clearly, we tend to fill in the darkness with what we think is going on. And so I think that the fear of darkness is kind of inherent in our nature. But inside the church, darkness, our aversion to darkness or our fear of darkness has been actually sanctified. From the beginning, and when I say sanctified, legitimized. From the beginning, Christianity's never been really had anything nice to say about the darkness. Christians have used the darkness as metaphors or synonyms for sin, ignorance, spiritual blindness, death, destruction, and evil. Theologically, that kind of language creates all kinds of problems. I'm sorry, this thing keeps falling off my ear. It pits every day into two, it divides the day into night and dark, and it pits the two against one another. Identifying God with the sunny side and leaving us to fend for ourselves in the dark. And it also creates kind of like a giant closet that we can shove all the things that scare us into so that we don't have to deal with them. And we don't have to think about them, and we don't have to look at them. But the problem with that is nobody taught me that there's as much darkness inside of me as there is on the outside. And nobody told me that I had the power to affect its hold on my life. Nobody told me how to talk back to the dark. Nobody told me that you can even breathe into the darkness. I was taught that darkness is not something to be looked at. Instead, you're supposed to avert your eyes. You're not supposed to look at it. The idea that darkness can be a safe space was absolutely absurd. The only strategy that I was offered for dealing with the dark was to turn a light on. From the time I was a little kid and as an adult. As a Christian, the go-to verse for flipping the light switch on is 1 John 1:5, where it says, God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. If you take this verse at face value, it results in a kind of spirituality that denies the existence of the darkness, and at very least, it deprives the darkness of any kind of meaningful attention. You just avoid it. You put it in the closet. You shut the door. You don't deal with it. I'll concede that there's no darkness in God, within God, but the evidence suggests that God is not only present in the darkness, God has actually hidden himself there, creating a safe space for us to land. There are several passages of scripture that support the idea that God remains present in the dark. For me, the past 21 months has been Isaiah 45:3. And I will give you treasures hidden in the darkness, secret riches. I will do this so that you may know that I am the one who calls you by name. I'm not sure how long after my niece passed away that I actually stumbled onto this verse, but it's been my go-to every time her absence just overwhelms me. I will give you treasures treasures hidden in the darkness. One of the things about darkness is that we talked about is like you can't see. That's kind of the principle behind it, right? But vision requires very little in the way of intimacy. You know, sight naturally prefers that which outer appearances, it focuses on the surface of things. So vision in some ways is a very superficial sense. But think about when you close your eyes. You close your eyes and you kiss someone that you love. You close your eyes and you listen to music that you love. In those moments, when it's dark because your eyes are closed, you encounter that person you love at a totally different level than you do in the daylight. And when you listen to that music with your eyes closed, you experience it in a totally different way than you do when the lights are on. Darkness creates space for intimacy, and it's not just intimacy with one another, but darkness creates space for intimacy with God. While darkness is unavoidable, I don't believe it's antagonistic or inherently evil by nature. I think that's something we've been taught. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that light and dark are just two sides of the same coin. Neither side is inherently good or bad. There's a principle in Taoism, which is a Far Eastern, I guess you would call, way of believing. It's a concept of yin and yang, and it suggests that everything comes with a complement. So if you have light, you have to have darkness. If you have darkness, you have to have light. We're the ones who've taken this story of balanced opposites and we've loaded it with values that are not present in the story. It doesn't say that light is good and dark is bad, okay? As it turns out, darkness is essential to our very well-being. We need darkness to sleep, and we also need darkness to be well. We have this thing called a circadian rhythm, which I don't know a whole lot about, but our sleep cycle, that circadian rhythm, actually matches the cycle of day and night, which affects everything from our body chemistry to our relationships. I was just thinking about, last week was daylight savings, and we lost an hour of darkness, and I still haven't caught up. So just 1 hour less has an effect on our bodies, on our minds, on our spirits. In Genesis 1:1, when God began to create, it was dark over the deep sea, and when God's wind swept over the waters. I'm kind of a visual person. Actually, not kind of, I'm a very visual person. So I always see pictures when I read. And I like to imagine this particular verse, that when God unleashed her creativity, darkness was the palette upon which she painted the universe. That's the image I get out of Genesis 1:1. As the story goes, God separated the light from the day, the light from the darkness. He called them day and night. But God didn't call night evil and didn't imply that it was somehow inferior to the day. I also find it fascinating that God, as the story goes, created light. He could have, or she could have, eliminated the darkness, but chose not to. I think there's a very good reason why the darkness still exists. And I think it's because it creates that opportunity, it creates that room, that space to intimately know the God who knows us. One of my favorite authors is Barbara Brown Taylor, and she asks, if Christians look to creation for wisdom about their spiritual life, seeing resurrection in the springtime, divine promise in a rainbow, or the flight of the Spirit in a dove, why don't we look to the moon for wisdom about our relationship with God? Interesting question. Why don't we look to the moon? For me, I think the moon actually is a truer mirror of my soul than the sun that shines every day the same way. First, the moon never looks the same. Some nights it's round and bright as a spotlight. Other nights it's thinner than the sickle. Sometimes it sits high in the sky. And sometimes it's just like right below the tree line. And then there's other times where it's not visible at all. There's nothing random about the moon changing. It's called a lunar cycle. It's dark out tonight. No worries, it won't be dark forever. Oh, the moon's bright out tonight. Enjoy it because it won't be bright forever. Sounds a bit like life, right? Some days are great and other times not so much. An interesting thought occurred to me while I was thinking about the moon. And on the nights that the moon vanishes, I think there's like 3 nights in the lunar cycle where the moon disappears from view completely. it's at that very time that the new moon is being created. And I saw like something in terms of like this cycle of life. You know, human life is created in the darkness of the womb. You know, a seed is buried in the ground in a hole, you know, covered in manure. Yet life emerges even in that dark, stinky place. Jesus, as the story goes, was conceived in darkness of Mary's womb. He was born in the middle of the night. He died on a cross when the world went dark. And his resurrection took place in the dark as well. I know at Easter, we all celebrate the resurrection as though it took place in broad daylight with beams of light coming from heaven, trumpet sounds, and all that kind of thing. But the truth of the matter is that Jesus' resurrection took place in a cave, in complete silence, with no witnesses, in absolute darkness. Again, I'm really visual, so I'm picturing this, and I'm thinking about how, like, you've got the smell of the fresh earth and this damp stone that had been rolled in front of the tomb. Total darkness, no light. The principle I take from all of that is that new life starts in the dark. So how can darkness be evil, inherently evil? How can darkness be a bad thing? Has anyone here ever been inside a cave? Okay, has anyone ever been here inside a cave that's not one of those tourist caves, like just a random cave? When I was in India for a summer, a group of my friends, we were walking back from someplace, and we were walking along a railroad track, and there was this cave. And someone in my group thought it was a really good idea to go explore the cave. And for those of you who don't know me, I am so claustrophobic. I don't like elevators, let alone a cave. So I didn't think it was a good idea, but I went along. And so we get into the mouth of this cave, and just a few feet in, and I mean, it is total pitch black darkness. You can't see your hand in front of your face. And then this swarm of bats comes flying over our heads, and I was about done, okay? I mean, really about done. The only light we had a couple of small flashlights, because this was not a planned little excursion. This was just a side trip. And we had these little flashlights, and in that kind of darkness, you can barely like see the next step you're going to take. And there were no like railings or anything like that installed. There were no floodlights on the bottom to illuminate this cave. And we continue to walk, and we get deeper in, and we're making some turns, and we're stumbling because we can't see where we're going. And someone had the idea that perhaps we should turn around and go out. We had gone as far as we were going to go. It was probably me saying that. And I probably said it more than once. So what I found interesting is, like, we weren't able to see anything, but what I really remember as I was thinking about this, what I remember so much about that cave, the darkness, yes, but the silence inside the cave. There was just like no sound in there. I remember I could hear my heartbeat, like just pounding in my ears. I could hear my friend next to me breathing. We weren't talking. I think we were all scared to death, and we just didn't want to admit it. But it was so quiet, just so quiet. So when we finally came to our senses and decided that we wanted to leave the cave, the interesting thing about caves is the way out is the way in. So we had to retrace our steps in the dark back to where we started. And when we got to the mouth of that cave, one, I was finally be able to exhale. But two, the light was like blinding because we had been in there for a little while. And like, it really took a moment for our sight to be able to kind of adjust to the light. And it occurred to me that we are kind of equipped the way we're made to function in the darkness. I think for me, darkness tends to paralyze me. But as I was remembering about this cave story, I was like, darkness, we can function, we can move, we can find a way, even with the little amount of light we might have in that moment. Many great spiritual leaders have had their lives changed inside of caves. Gautama Buddha regularly meditated inside a cave, and that is an example to his followers. Muhammad spent time in a small cave outside Mecca. In fact, the first verses of the Quran came into the world from the belly of a cave. Jesus was born in a cave. That may sound like news to y'all. It was news to me. As a Westerner, I thought that Jesus was born kind of like in a barn, that creche thing that you see and whatnot, and I kind of thought that was how it was. But I spent a summer over in Israel, and very near Bethlehem. I lived on the West Bank, and so I went to visit Bethlehem, and you enter this church. It's called the Church of the Nativity. And when you go into this church, right at the altar, there's like this lower level. And the church was built over top of where historians think that Jesus was actually born. Now, how accurate it is, I don't know. But I was fascinated by the fact that I kept thinking Jesus was born in a barn, and he basically was born underground. I asked the tour guide about that. I'm like, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And he's like, well, at the time that Jesus was born, caves made the best stables because they protected you from the weather, and it also protected you from predators that could sneak up behind you. So there was safety in that cave, safety in that darkness. For me, the idea that Jesus was born in a cave just speaks to my soul. Thinking about this God who came to dwell in the darkness of this world, to share our human history, to share our story, even the parts of our story that are most painful, the parts of our story that we shove in the closet and we lock in the darkness. This God, born in the darkness of a cave, this is going to drive me insane, came to participate, to be a part of, to sit with us, to be with us in the darkness that we experience here. We approach Easter. I think Ray said it's in 3 weeks. I think it's important to remember that God was not looking down from heaven on a cross. God was hanging on a cross. God entered our world, experienced our darkness firsthand. It doesn't get any darker than being crucified. That we would know this God as this God knows us. I think this goes back to why God didn't eliminate darkness when the opportunity was there at creation, as the story goes. Darkness creates that space, that place for intimacy. One of God's names is Emmanuel, God with us. We worship a God that is not apart from us, but with us. And so when we're sitting in the darkness, when we get that box delivered to our doorstep and someone has died, or the diagnosis is cancer, or someone tells us they don't love us anymore and wants a divorce, when everything in your life goes dark, this God who was born in darkness is with us. Going back to Mary Oliver's poem, she talks about the kinds of treasures that are hidden in the darkness. She talks about treasures hidden in the darkness. And I think one of the treasures that's hidden in the darkness is that darkness tends to slow us down a bit. I don't know about you, but my life I often feels like I'm inside a pinball machine. I'm the little silver ball, and I'm bouncing off bumpers constantly they're just random, and everything is moving at high speed. But the darkness allows me to slow down it kind of forces you to slow down. At least it makes me slow down while I'm driving. I can tell you that for sure. But it actually, the evening for me is like my best time. I tend to be a night person. I like to be up late. My job doesn't permit that, but I do it anyway. And I think it's because my mind literally gets quiet when it gets dark outside. I'm more able to focus. I'm more able to rest. It just feels right to me. In the daytime, it feels like everything's flat out full speed, but at night, it feels right to just be still. Nighttime, there are less visual distractions, and I think that's what, for me, during daylight, I'm distracted, easily distracted. And so at nighttime, I'm not so much, and so for me, I think it works better for me. It has a calming effect on my mind. Now, there are times I wake up in the middle of the night, and my mind is racing. And I'm thinking about my job, I'm thinking about, whatever's going on in my life. And so it's not always that the nighttime or the darkness calms me down, but I can let it. And I'm learning to work my way through those kinds of nights where I'm up 3 and 4 hours at a time. When we're unable to see, our other senses are heightened as well. I think I'm a better listener when it's dark, because I'm not distracted by what's going on around me. I definitely hear things in the dark that I don't hear during the day. My house has this tendency to creak, and it's really loud. I mean, it's really loud, and it seems to happen when I'm sleeping. And so I'll wake up and I'll hear the creaking of the house. My dog, Roxy, she has these little tags and they jingle. I'll hear those. And those are things I don't hear during the day. The dog is still running around the house. I don't hear the tags, but at nighttime I hear them. I'm definitely much more focused. The other hidden treasure I think I've discovered in the darkness is the people who will sit with you there. They'll hold your hand and they'll remind you to just breathe. I've got lots of friends when my life is on track and things are going well. But when darkness hits, when I was diagnosed with cancer years ago, when my niece died 21 months ago, there were people that came and sat. They didn't have any words of wisdom. They just sat and they cried with me. And that was just a treasure I had never thought about before. But I think perhaps the greatest treasure I've discovered is that in the darkness, God moves toward us. He creates a safe space for us under the cover of night. And this is very new to me, just to be transparent. I'm like talking to myself here this morning, okay? I love the Psalms, and that tends to be where I go when I'm feeling overwhelmed and where everything is just, there's no light. In Psalm 17:3, David says of God, he says, "You visited me in the night." I think that's just such a beautiful picture. God visited me in the night when Maddie died, and his visit came through people who sat with me. The psalmist in Psalm 42:8 says that in the night your song shall be with me. I can't even tell you how many times that has been my ever-present reality, that God has been my song in the night. A lot, most of the things I write are written at night when it's really dark in my life. But perhaps my favorite psalm, my favorite verse out of the Psalms is Psalm 18:11. In the King James, which is not a version I generally read, it says, "God made darkness his secret place." Other translations say that God made darkness his hiding place. So I looked up the word in the Hebrew for hiding place or secret place, and it's this word called sather, which means covering or shelter. So rereading that verse again, it says, God made darkness a covering or a shelter, a safe place for us. When I look at the life of Jesus, it seems he often sought out that safe space in the dark. I noticed like he did most of his miracles in broad daylight, where the crowds are around. But it was nighttime when he would go off by himself and he would pray alone on a hillside. Or the one time we really recognized the prayer that he was praying was in the Garden of Gethsemane before he was taken away by the authorities. And it was dark. Every time he would go away at night and he would go pray in the dark. And I like to think that in the dark, Jesus found that safe space with his Heavenly Father. And I think that's where he couldn't express his doubts and his fears to his disciples, but I'm sure he had them. I'm sure he had them. I'm sure in Gethsemane, we know that he was asking his Father to not make this happen, to make it so that he wouldn't have to go through what loomed ahead, the crucifixion. That was real darkness, and that was really real. And I think you can fake it a lot in the daytime, but it's much harder to fake it at night. It's much harder to hold on to everything at nighttime. It's for me, I find it's easier to just be real. My prayers are a lot more real when it's dark. I think God does that for each of us even to today. When we approach him in the darkest moments of our lives, he provides that safe space to land. And I asked myself this question. I was like, what would it look like instead of ignoring the darkness, cursing it, or running from it, if I embraced it and leaned into the safe space where the hidden presence of God resides and dwells? What if? This is not something I've done very well, just being transparent with y'all. I tend to seek out God's safe space as a last resort, if at all. But God, I've discovered, is very patient. And he draws me there. And once I stop shadow boxing with the shadows in the night, I encounter his presence in a way that I don't when it's daylight in my life. When everything is going good, when everything is going well, I don't have that same, and I wish I did, but I don't have that same connection with God that I do when everything falls apart. I don't know why that is. Another message, perhaps, I don't know. For me, I think one of the most beautiful stories about how God meets us in the darkness is the one that involves one of his devoted followers, Mary Magdalene. I think what I love most about her story is that she was not the ideal or perfect woman. I can relate to her because I am not the ideal or perfect woman. In fact, when you read her story, it seems to suggest that when she met Jesus, she was at her absolute lowest point in her life. There was a lot of darkness in her life. We don't know how much about her encounter with Jesus that first time. What we do know is that her life was transformed, changed to the point that she became a follower, a lover of Jesus, a lover of Christ. She was one of the few disciples who actually witnessed his crucifixion, burial, and resurrection. In fact, just as a side note, she was the first person to preach the gospel, an imperfect woman with a past. I like that. I like that a lot. Mary knew firsthand that losing someone you love plunges you into a darkness that feels suffocating. Nothing makes sense anymore. The solid ground that you were once standing on isn't solid, and panic sets in. When Mary witnessed the death of Jesus on the cross, I believe her soul was plunged into a darkness and despair that perhaps she hadn't known before. To make matters worse, when she went to look for Jesus' body in the tomb where they had laid him, his body wasn't there. The story tells us that she was desperate to find the body of Jesus. I'd like to turn over to Gospel of John and kind of read the story, just a few verses out of it. John chapter 20, verses 1 and 2. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb, and she saw the stone had been moved from the entrance. She ran to Peter and the other disciple Jesus loved, and that would be John, and said, "They've taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they've put him." When I read the words, "while it was still dark," I can't help but think of the physical darkness, of how dark it is just before dawn breaks, but also the emotional darkness and the deep grief, perhaps disillusionment even, and despair she was feeling. She'd lost her beloved teacher and friend, Jesus. Moving on in John 20 to verses 11 through 16. Now Mary stood outside of the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white seated there where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" Her response was, "They've taken my Lord away, and I don't know where they've put him." At this, she turned around and she saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize it was Jesus. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you're looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you've put him, and I will go get him." And then Jesus spoke just one word to her. He spoke her name. He said, "Mary." And in that moment, she recognized her beloved. What I take away from this passage is, overwhelmed by her darkness, deep grief bordering on despair, Mary was desperately searching for the dead body of her beloved Jesus. But what she found, the treasure that she found in the darkest moment of her life, was the eternal one who called her by her name. Darkness creates space for intimacy, and that intimacy includes intimacy with God. Just to wrap it up, darkness is merely the absence of discernible light. It's not the absence of God's presence. God still calls her beloved children by name. And I'd like you to just humor me this morning and just close your eyes for a moment and listen. Listen to what you hear when you close your eyes. Open your heart. Open your heart to hear God whisper your name this morning. No matter what you're going through, whatever the darkness is for you, just be quiet for a moment. Dear God, while our hearts may sink and our hands may shake when the box of darkness arrives on our doorstep, may we remember that when we cannot see the way forward, you move toward us. You've hidden your presence in the very darkness that seems like it will swallow us whole. Remind us that we are safe with you in the darkest of nights. And in your time, you will lead us out of this momentary darkness. For the way out is the way in. Amen.